Billionaire family mocked a black CEO minutes. Later, she shut down their $2 to be Gala. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The laughter hit first. Sharp, confident, too loud for a room draped in chandeliers and white marble. Then came the sentence that split the gala in half. Go back to the staff entrance. The words carried across the ballroom like a thrown glass, shattering the hush of polite music and expensive perfume. Heads turned. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. A ripple of amusement moved through the crowd, the kind that grows when people believe they're watching something beneath them. At the center of it all stood her tall, composed, wrapped in a soft blush-pink gown that didn't need sequins or diamonds to command attention. One hand rested lightly on her waist. The other held a phone to her ear. She didn't flinch, she didn't turn, but the muscle in her jaw tightened, just once, and that was enough to tell you she heard every syllable. Across from her, a glamorous older woman in navy blue leaned forward with a smirk sharp enough to slice ice. Her manicured finger pointed straight at the black woman as if issuing instructions to a housekeeper. Beside her, a tuxedoed man laughed so hard his shoulders shook, eyes glistening with a kind of joy reserved for cruelty disguised as humor. Behind them, guests in gowns and tuxes watched like spectators at a theater they didn't pay for. Some chuckled, some whispered. A few looked away, but none stepped forward. Not yet. The ballroom was a cathedral of wealth-arched ceilings, golden sconces, tables dressed in ivory silk. Every inch radiated old money confidence. And in this world, a black woman in a simple, elegant dress was apparently all it took to trigger the wrong kind of attention. She lowered her phone a fraction, not enough to show reaction, just enough to control the moment. The crowd didn't know it, but the silence drifting around her wasn't embarrassment. It was calculation. Before any of that storm could break, she inhaled, once quiet, steady, grounded, and her gaze swept the room. She saw the pity, the curiosity, the mockery. She had seen it before. In boardrooms, in restaurants she owned, in hotels bearing her name, it always sounded the same. You don't belong here. Tonight, they said it louder. And the ballroom listened. She lifted her chin. Still no retort. Still no raised voice. Still no hint of the truth about who she was or what she controlled. But before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The woman in navy took a step closer, confident she had found easy prey. You heard me, she said, voice dripping condescension. Staff entrance is in the back. Try to use the correct door next time. The black woman finally turned her head, slowly, deliberately, a movement so precise it made the chandelier seem to pause. Her eyes didn't show anger, just a promise. A quiet one, the kind that arrives before a storm. And the storm, in this ballroom, was about to become unforgettable. For a moment, the ballroom simply watched her breathe. The woman in navy shifted her weight, amused by her own performance. They really let anyone in these days, she muttered to the man beside her, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. Laughter bubbled again, softer this time, but persistent, like a simmering pot about to boil over. The black woman didn't move. Her posture was a quiet rebuke, elegant, centered, impossible to rattle. She slipped her phone down from her ear, but her hand lingered near it, not as a shield, but as if holding on to the last thread of restraint. The tuxedoed man wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. Oh, come on, don't pout, he said, chuckling. Just ask one of the servers. They'll show you where the uniforms get pressed. A few guests snickered. A few others turned away. And a few, very few, exchanged looks that hinted at discomfort. Not everyone was laughing. Near the far side of the ballroom, a young woman in a soft beige gown froze mid-sip of champagne. She watched the scene unfold with growing unease, her brows knitting. She nudged her date. She's not staff, she whispered. I saw her name on the check-in display. VIP list. Her date frowned. Then why are they? He didn't finish, because he didn't need to. They both understood. This wasn't about a door. This wasn't about an entrance. This was about who people believe belong. The black woman finally turned her head fully toward the couple laughing at her. Her eyes were still steady, still cool, but they carried the weight of someone who had walked through this exact moment in 100 different forms. Airports, boardrooms, hotel lobbies, private clubs. Always the same tone, always the same assumption. Across the room, a waiter paused mid-stride, clutching a tray of crystal flutes to his chest, as if afraid the next second might explode. A trio of guests near the orchestra pit had stopped pretending to talk and were openly watching, lips tight, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. The music, once elegant and warm, now felt like background static too cheerful for what the room had become. The woman in navy crossed her arms. "You don't have to glare," she said. "If you came through the wrong entrance, just admit it. These events have rules." The black woman's eyelids lowered a fraction. Not anger, calculation. Her voice came out soft, too soft, but every word landed clean. "I came through the correct door." The man barked a laugh. "Right." But a tremor of doubt flickered across a few faces nearby. At the edge of the ballroom, the young woman in beige stepped slightly forward, as if an internal switch had flipped. Her breathing quickened. She wasn't brave yet, but she was close. Very close. The black woman let the room simmer in its own assumptions for one last second. Then she lifted her phone again, but this time, not to retreat, not to escape, just a quiet, measured tap on the screen. A signal. And somewhere far beyond the chandeliers and champagne, an engine began to hum, the first shift of a system waking up. The ballroom didn't fully crumble. Not yet. But something in its center shifted, a hairline fracture spreading beneath the marble sheen. The woman in navy sensed it before anyone else. Her smirk faltered, then stiffened back into place. Confidence returned to her chin, but not her eyes. "Don't play coy," she said, adjusting her diamond bracelet like a weapon of status. "Everyone knows the staff door is on the service corridor. If you use the main entrance, well," she gave a pointed look at the black woman's gown. "That would be surprising." The black woman didn't rise to it. She didn't even blink. The tuxedoed man joined back in, emboldened. "She's probably with catering," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "They always get confused when they're told to deliver to the ballroom instead of the prep wing." A few guests chuckled again, but this time the laughter wobbled. One man cleared his throat, another shifted his feet. The room wasn't as unanimous as before. Near the back, the young woman in the beige gown took another small step forward, fingers tightening around her clutch. Her date whispered urgently, "What are you doing?" "She didn't come from catering," she whispered back. "She walked in with the early donors group. I saw her. I remember the dress." "You're sure?" "Yes." She swallowed, debating whether to move closer or stay put. Her heartbeat thudded visibly at her neck. Across the room, a maitre d' in a crisp white jacket hovered near a column. His instincts screamed at him to intervene, but years of hierarchy pressed on his shoulders like a hand. He stayed rooted. Meanwhile, the orchestra played a soft crescendo that didn't match the tension, suffocating the air. Bowstrings quivered while champagne fizzed, untouched, on silver trays. A whisper floated from a cluster of guests. "Why are they talking to her like that? Who is she? Maybe she really came through the wrong entrance." "I don't know, she doesn't look lost. She looks like she owns the floor." The black woman's phone vibrated once in her hand, subtle, controlled. She didn't look at it. She didn't need to. A single tap had already sent a signal across the city. Protocol 7 initiated. A system set in motion. The woman in navy noticed the vibration and pounced. "Oh, calling backup?" she sneered. "Look, sweetheart, if you need your shift lead, they're behind the banquet hall." The black woman finally raised her eyes fully to meet hers, calm, precise, unshaken. "That's not who I called," the man snorted. "Then who exactly?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. In the far corner, a large digital display rotated through sponsor credits, then glitched. Just a flicker, barely noticeable, but noticeable enough. A few nearby guests frowned. The ballroom lights dimmed for half a second like the building exhaled. The woman in navy rolled her eyes. "Don't pretend that means something. It's an old venue. Things flicker." But her voice had thinned, cracking at the edges. The young woman in beige gasped softly. "Did you see that?" Her date nodded slowly. "Something's changing." The black woman finally shifted her stance. Not much, just her weight settling on one heel, elegance threaded with resolve. The kind of pose someone takes not when they're under attack, but when they're waiting for the exact second to strike, and somewhere, beyond the velvet curtains and golden sconces, the hum of the system grew louder. Invisible to most, very real to her, the ballroom's fault line widened, and the collapse had already begun quietly, beautifully, inevitably. The ballroom tried to hold its shape elegant, polished, perfectly controlled, but the tension pressing against its walls had weight now, real weight. The digital sponsor screen flickered a second time. Longer. Enough for a few gasps. The woman in navy froze mid-sentence. The tuxedoed man stopped laughing, and across the room, the young woman in the beige gown finally stepped out of the shadows. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply brave. She cleared her throat, soft but sharp enough to poke a hole straight through the ballroom's false calm. "Excuse me." The couple tormenting the black woman turned, irritated at being interrupted. But the young woman didn't wilt. She clasped her clutch tighter and spoke again, louder this time. I saw her earlier tonight. She didn't come through any staff hallway." Her voice trembled, but her spine didn't. The woman in navy narrowed her eyes. "Sweetheart, you're confused. It happens." "I'm not confused," the young woman said, breath unsteady but growing steadier with every word. "She checked in with the early donors. I was right behind her." A small murmur rippled across nearby tables. A few heads turned toward her. Something fragile began to shift. The tuxedoed man scoffed. "And you are?" "Someone who pays attention," she replied, surprising even herself. Her date winced beside her but didn't pull her back. His jaw clenched not in disagreement, but in fear of the backlash she might face. The woman in navy attempted a laugh, brittle like a cracked vase. "Oh, please. You think you know how these events work? Donor check-in isn't in the main ballroom." She clearly wandered in through. "I saw her name." The young woman cut her off. Silence. "I saw it on the digital check-in board," she continued. "Carter, Ava, VIP tier." A few guests inhaled sharply. The name hung in the air like a dropped pin. Carter. Somewhere in the back, a man whispered, "Is she part of the Carter Foundation?" Another replied, "No way. They're the primary sponsor." But the young woman's voice didn't stop there, couldn't stop now. "And I watched her walk through the front entrance," she said firmly. "The one we all use." Her words echoed in the vaulted ceiling. The black woman didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her, not yet. But the smallest shift softened her shoulders, unnoticed by most but unmistakable to anyone who understood the language of silent gratitude. The woman in navy clenched her jaw. "You're making assumptions. You made them first," the young woman said quietly. That landed harder than any shout. The tuxedoed man stepped forward, crowding her space. "Watch your tone." Before he could finish, the maitre d' the man who'd remained petrified earlier took one hesitant step toward them. "Sir, she's right." His voice was low, but steady enough to cut through the tension. More murmurs, glances, recalculations. The ballroom wasn't on her side yet, but it was no longer entirely on theirs either. And in the center of it all, the black woman finally turned her head just slightly, not to confront, not to respond, but to observe. Her gaze swept across the room, catching the young woman's eyes for a fraction of a second. A silent acknowledgement. A spark. The kind that turns witnesses into allies, and allies into a movement. Somewhere beneath the chandeliers, the hum of the system matched her pulse. Steady. Rising. Ready. The witness had awakened, and the night was no longer theirs to control. The ballroom's oxygen shifted subtle but unmistakable. A room built on elegance had learned a new language tonight. Discomfort. The woman in navy sensed the tide turning and clenched harder. Her pride refused to drown quietly. "Oh, enough of this drama," she snapped. If she really checked in as VIP, she must have used someone else's pass. These events get infiltrated all the time. A collective gasp fluttered across the tables. Accusing someone of stealing credentials in a high-profile gala was no small thing. The tuxedoed man stepped closer to the black woman, invading her space with a slow, theatrical shake of his head. "You know," he said, voice dropping low, "you people always find creative ways to slip through doors meant for others." It was the phrase she'd heard her entire life. 3 women at a nearby table stiffened. The maitre d' flinched. The young woman in beige covered her mouth, and the black woman Ava closed her eyes. Not long, not dramatic, but long enough for memory to slice through the moment like a razor. Flashback. 17. A scholarship banquet held in a hotel she couldn't afford to stay in. She wore a borrowed dress, navy blue, too big at the shoulders, and carried a program with her name on it. The coordinator stopped her at the door, smiling like she meant well. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but service staff aren't allowed to cut through this corridor." Ava showed her the invitation, showed her name, showed her the scholarship letter, and still the woman said, "You must have picked that up from a table. Let's not cause trouble." Ava remembered standing outside in the cold for 28 minutes before someone from the foundation noticed and brought her inside. Present, 28 minutes. 28 years. Nothing had changed. Her eyes opened. The tuxedoed man smirked, misreading her silence as surrender. "See? She knows exactly what I'm talking about." A murmur of disapproval rose, not loud, not enough to be rebellion, but enough to signal the room was cracking. The woman in navy doubled down. "You should be grateful," she said sharply. "We're simply asking you to follow the rules. People like you." "Finish that sentence," the young woman in beige said, voice suddenly shaking with anger instead of fear. The entire ballroom snapped toward her. She stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "You made assumptions the second she walked in," she said. "You didn't ask for ID, you didn't confirm her status, you looked at her, decided she didn't belong, and humiliated her. That's not security, that's bias." Her date tugged her wrist. She didn't move. The tuxedoed man scoffed. "And what are you, her lawyer?" "No," she said. "Just someone who's tired of watching people get stepped on, especially in rooms built with their money." A hush fell over the gala. Ava remained still, absorbing every word spoken around her like they were data points in a long equation. Then the woman in navy took one fatal step closer. "So what if we judged her?" she hissed. "Look at her. Look at that dress. Do you honestly think someone like that?" Ava's eyes lifted. Calm. Level. Unshakable. That calmness unsettled the room more than any outburst could have, because everyone felt it, the shift. That fine, electrifying line between patience, and the moment it runs out, she raised her phone again. No tremor. No rush. Just purpose. And somewhere in the city, a secure line lit up. Protocol was coming. The collapse had already begun. They just didn't know it yet. The ballroom didn't notice the first shift. Power rarely announces itself. It simply changes the temperature of the air. Ava lifted her phone again, not in retreat, not in defense, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly how the next hour would unfold. One soft tap, a single vibration, then silence. But somewhere beyond the chandeliers, deep inside a corporate server room across the city, a secure channel blinked awake. Inside the ballroom, the woman in navy let out a mocking laugh. "Oh, look, she's calling again," she said. "Maybe this time someone picks up." A few nearby guests flinched at the tone. The young woman in beige glared at her. Ava didn't speak. She didn't have to. The room was already listening. A discreet ping echoed from her phone, barely audible unless you were standing close. She glanced at the screen for half a second. The message glowed. Protocol 7, activated. Awaiting confirmation. Her thumb brushed the corner of the screen in a gesture so subtle, so quiet, that the ballroom mistook it for hesitation. It was the opposite. Across the room, the digital sponsor board flickered again, this time shifting colors, recalibrating its content. For a split second, the Carter Foundation logo nearly appeared before dissolving into a neutral placeholder screen. The tuxedoed man scoffed. "These old systems," he muttered. "Cheap tech." Ava's eyes lifted just slightly. Cheap tech? The Carter Foundation spent $30 million upgrading those displays. This was no glitch. This was the system waking up. The maitre d', now visibly uneasy, approached with hesitant steps. "Ma'am," he said quietly to the woman in navy, "we should verify her registration before making further claims. It's procedure." The woman in navy bristled. "I don't need procedure to see what's right in front of me." A few guests exchanged looks. Confidence was no longer flowing in her direction. Ava finally broke her stillness. She lowered her phone to her side, exhaled once a steady, controlled breath, and spoke softly. Not loud, not confrontational, just enough to pierce the room. "You've made many assumptions tonight." The tuxedoed man rolled his eyes. "Here we go," Ava continued, unbothered. "And you warned me to follow the rules." "Exactly," the woman in navy snapped. Ava's gaze sharpened. "But you skipped the first one." "And what rule is that?" the man mocked. A beat of silence. A cinematic pause. Then Ava said, verification. The word hit the floor like a gavel. The maitre d' inhaled sharply. The young woman in beige stood taller. Even the orchestra faltered on a note. Ava raised her phone again, not to call, but to confirm. One more tap. Protocol 7. Confirmed. Administrative locks initiated. The ballroom lights dimmed just slightly. A soft, mechanical hum rolled above the ceiling. The sponsor board rebooted. The tuxedoed man finally frowned. What the? The woman in navy clutched her shawl. Is something wrong with the power? Ava looked at them with calm that bordered on chilling. Nothing is wrong, she said softly. Things are simply aligning. The young woman in beige whispered to her date. She's not just anyone. No one knew how right she was. No one knew how close they were to the first crack of collapse. Ava's phone buzzed again. A new message appeared. Next step ready. Say the word. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just let the moment breathe. Because power wasn't coming. Power was already here. The hall lights steadied again, but they weren't the same. Something in their glow felt intentional, as if the building itself had adjusted its posture. The tuxedoed man scanned the ceiling with a frown. Why does it feel like the whole place just rebooted? The woman in navy tightened her grip on her clutch. It's nothing. Probably a breaker issue. Old venues have problems. But the maitre d' stepped closer, voice low and uneasy. Ma'am, this building was renovated 6 months ago. New electrical grid. Top industry contractors. A beat. Things don't flicker. A murmur of unease swept the nearest tables like wind brushing over dry leaves. At the center of it all, Ava remained still, phone resting loosely in her hand, posture calm as marble. But the calm wasn't passive anymore. It felt like strategy. The sponsor display board flickered to life again, this time stable, crisp, and glowing with a pristine white interface. The guests looked up as new text began scrolling across the screen. Updating sponsorship ledger, verifying ownership structure. The tuxedoed man's jaw tightened. Why is the system doing that? Who triggered a ledger update during a gala? No one answered. They didn't have to. Because every glance aimed at Ava slowly began to shift away from dismissal toward suspicion. The kind that asks, who exactly are you? Ava lifted her gaze toward the screen briefly. Not proud, not smug, just aware. The system was responding to her touch. The orchestra stumbled into silence, the conductor lowering his hands as if unsure whether to continue. The music wasn't failing. The moment was. The young woman in beige stepped closer, courage forming like a breath of warm air in winter. Her voice was small but clear. She didn't do anything wrong. And the system wouldn't update unless... She hesitated, eyes widening. Unless someone with access permissions initiated it. Access permissions? The words hit the ballroom like a hidden door clicking open. The woman in navy scoffed, though the crack in her voice betrayed her. Don't be ridiculous. She doesn't have access to anything here. But as she gestured, her bracelet glinted under the lights, and in that shimmer, Ava's phone vibrated again. She read the screen silently. Sponsorship ledger update. 43% complete. Foundation control status. Verified. A hush rolled over the room, not like silence, but like reverence. Ava finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but landing with the precision of a dropped pin in a cathedral. You're wrong. The woman in navy blinked. About what? Ava's expression didn't change. You assume I don't have access. The tuxedoed man stepped closer, agitation bleeding into his tone. And do you? He challenged. Ava didn't answer. Instead, the sponsor board answered for her. Carter Foundation, Primary Sponsorship Authority. Authentication status. Active. People gasped. A few turned to stare at the woman in navy. Others looked between Ava and the glowing screen with dawning awareness. The young woman in beige whispered, "Oh my God." Her date swallowed. She's connected, deeply connected. Oh, Ava lowered her phone, eyes calm but glinting with something sharper beneath the surface. She still hadn't revealed who she was, but the room already knew one thing. Whoever Ava was, she wasn't someone you humiliate and walk away from unchanged. The ballroom's energy turned dense, almost physical like humid air before a storm. It pressed against skin, against breath, against certainty. The sponsor board completed another line of its update. Carter Foundation Primary Financial Authority. 93%, 94%. The tuxedoed man's face drained of color. Why is it pulling that data? He demanded. That ledger isn't even public. The woman in navy forced a brittle laugh, but her hand trembled as she adjusted her bracelet. This is absurd. The display must be malfunctioning. Someone call technical staff. No one moved. No one wanted to step between whatever was unfolding. The maitre d' cleared his throat gently. Ma'am, a sponsorship ledger cannot be accessed without at least 2 levels of executive authorization. He glanced toward Ava with a dawning understanding. And it cannot be triggered externally. The woman in navy's voice rose an octave. Are you accusing her of hacking the system? A nervous, hysterical edge clung to every syllable. The maitre d' swallowed. No, I'm saying she didn't need to. Ugh. The words struck the room like a dropped chandelier. Guests exchanged looks not amused, not curious, but alert. The kind of alertness that happens when people suddenly realize they may have aligned themselves with the wrong side. Ava stood in the center, still calm, still quiet her poise, more threatening now than any raised voice could have been. Her phone vibrated again. Ledger update complete. Authority status. Carter Foundation confirmed. Just as the final line flashed, the ballroom lights shifted subtly brighter near Ava, dimmer around the woman in navy and the tuxedoed man, as if the room itself understood the hierarchy better than they did. The woman in navy clutched her shawl. This can't be right. You don't even look like... The sentence caught in her throat, drowned by the weight of the moment. Several guests turned sharply toward her, faces tightening, because after everything she'd already said, that unfinished line was too honest, too revealing, too ugly. The young woman in beige stepped forward again. Say it, she said softly. Finish the sentence. The woman in navy froze, panic flickering through her eyes. Her husband, the tuxedoed man, forced a laugh, stepping in front of her. All right, enough. Clearly something's happening with the system. But whether she slipped in or faked credentials, we'll have this sorted. Security will... He didn't finish, because right then, the ballroom doors hissed open and 2 event coordinators rushed in, faces pale. One whispered frantically into her headset. The other stared directly at Ava, recognition washing over her like a tidal wave. Oh my God, she breathed. The tuxedoed man stiffened. What? What is it? The coordinator hesitated, then looked down at her tablet, its screen now showing the same update as the main display. Primary authority contact. Ava Carter. Status. Present active control. The name hit the crowd like thunder. Ava Carter. The name printed on the invitations. The name attached to the $2, 2B endowment. The name the entire gala claimed to honor. Everyone knew the Carter Foundation. But no one expected her. For the first time all night, the ballroom forgot how to breathe. Ava stood perfectly still, the soft pink fabric of her gown quiet against the tension ripping through the space. She hadn't moved an inch since her name flashed on the screen. She didn't need to. The name alone shifted the ground under everyone's feet. The tuxedoed man stepped back, stumbling slightly as if the marble beneath him had tilted. You Ava Carter? That's impossible. No one said, no one told us. A coordinator swallowed hard. Sir, she's listed as the controlling authority of tonight's gala. Every donor, every contract, every financial channel routes through her office. Ava lowered her gaze to her phone. One new message glowed. System ready. Standing by for your command. The woman in navy tried to salvage dignity, her voice cracking like thin ice. This is a misunderstanding. We didn't mean anything by what we said. You have to understand these events attract all kinds of people. A guest nearby turned in disgust. Another whispered, she's really trying to talk her way out of this? The young woman in beige took one small, decisive step closer to Ava, not to speak for her, but to stand near her. A symbolic shift, a line drawn. Ava didn't acknowledge it aloud, but the room pulsed with the weight of that choice. The tuxedoed man straightened his jacket, scrambling for control. Look, let's just forget all this. Clearly the system glitched. We didn't insult anyone of importance. A whoosh fell. Deadly. Instant. Ava lifted her eyes. Not angry, not emotional, just decisive. You insulted a guest, she said quietly. You humiliated her without verification. But, he stammered, we didn't know. That, Ava replied, was the mistake. She tapped her phone again. A single confirmation tone chimed soft, melodic, and final. On the sponsor display board, new text flooded the screen. Temporary funding freeze initiated. Bennett family gala status suspended. All operational access revoked. Gasps exploded across the ballroom. The tuxedoed man, Bennett, lurched forward. You can't just freeze a multi-billion-dollar event. We have contracts, vendors, investors. Ava didn't blink. You had them, she said. The woman in navy choked on a breath. This will ruin us. Do you understand? We're hosting senators, donors, CEOs. Then perhaps, Ava replied, you should have treated your guests with dignity. Her voice didn't rise, but the chandeliers trembled as if responding to the weight of her word. A tech coordinator rushed in from the hallway, tablet in hand. Ma'am, he said breathlessly to Ava, the freeze is confirmed across all networks. The Bennett accounts are locked, operations halted, staff notified. Bennett turned pale. You can't, Ava. You can't do this in front of everyone. You did what you did, she said calmly, in front of everyone. Silence rolled heavy and deep. Ava's phone buzzed once more. Full authority sequence complete, awaiting final directive. She let the message hang in the air like a drawn bowstring. Then she looked at the couple, no malice, no theatrics, just absolute clarity. Your behavior, she said, has consequences. Tonight, you will face them. The ballroom didn't clap, didn't cheer. It simply understood. Power had shifted, irreversibly. For a long moment, no one moved. The chandeliers glowed above the room like silent witnesses, shining down on the couple who just minutes ago believed they owned the night. Now they stood stranded in the very center of it, stripped of certainty, stripped of status, stripped of control. The woman in navy opened her mouth, but no sound formed. Her eyes darted wildly from the frozen sponsor board to Ava's unreadable expression. Security, a coordinator whispered into her earpiece, is requesting instructions. Ava didn't look away from the Bennetts. She spoke with the calm rhythm of someone stating a fact, not a threat. Escort them outside. The tuxedoed man jolted. You can't be serious. 2 security officers appeared at the ballroom entrance, dressed in black, their steps measured and deliberate. Not aggressive, not rushed, just certain. The room parted instinctively, creating a clean aisle straight through the marble floor. Guests stepped back, some avoiding eye contact, others refusing to look away. The officers reached the couple. Mr. Bennett, one said, your access has been revoked. We need you to come with us. The woman in navy grasped her husband's arm as if the marble beneath her heels were collapsing. This is our event. Our name is on the program. Ava's reply was soft. Not anymore. Her phone chimed. On the sponsor board, fresh text scrolled across. Bennett family removed from organizational authority. Replacement directorship. Carter Foundation. Gasps. Whispers. A sharp inhale from someone near the back. The tuxedoed man struggled as the officers guided him toward the aisle. This is humiliation, he barked. You're doing this just because... Ava tilted her head slightly. Because of how you treated a guest, nothing more. The woman in navy broke then, her facade crumbling under the weight of the room turning against her. I didn't know it was you, she whispered hoarsely. Ava's eyes softened, not kindly, but truthfully. That was the problem. The officers escorted the couple toward the doors, their steps echoing through the quiet like a verdict being carried out. For the first time all evening, the ballroom felt balanced. Justice didn't roar. It didn't gloat. It simply walked the Bennetts out of their own gala, while Ava stood exactly where they insisted she didn't belong, the center. The doors closed behind the Bennetts with a muted thud, soft but final, like a chapter sealing itself. For a heartbeat, the ballroom stayed perfectly still. No clinking glasses, no shifting fabric, no polite orchestra melodias, just silence wrapped around crystal and marble. Then, whispers. Not the cruel kind from earlier, not the mocking type that cast Ava as an outsider. These whispers moved differently, slower, heavier, reverent. A guest near the stage exhaled shakily. I can't believe they spoke to her like that. Another shook his head. I've been to every Carter Foundation event for 8 years. She built this night. The maitre d' straightened his jacket, newfound conviction in his posture. He stepped toward Ava, bowing his head just slightly. Miss, but the kind that reveal who people truly are when the hierarchy flips. From the corner, a senator whispered to his aide, make sure our office reaffirms partnership with the Carter Foundation first thing in the morning. The orchestra, after a long pause, resumed playing soft, warm, and unmistakably different. Not background noise, a tribute. Ava stood in the center, composed as ever, but the air around her had changed. Respect had replaced dismissal. Recognition had replaced doubt, and the ballroom, once a stage for humiliation, now looked at her the way one looks at the axis of a universe. Not because she demanded it, but because she'd earned it long before she walked through the door. Ava stepped forward, the orchestra soft beneath her, the ballroom hanging on her breath. She raised her glass not to celebrate, but to clarify. "I didn't correct you because I needed validation," she said quietly. "I corrected you because dignity is not optional. Not here, not anywhere." Silence deepened rich, humbled. She turned toward the doors where the Bennetts had vanished. "Power isn't loud," Ava finished. "It's consistent." And the room knew. They would remember this night for the rest of their lives.